I'm sorry.
We are living in a world of pure emotion. We don't think about things, we feel about them. And we think that making our living on feelings makes us capital G good people. Or so the woke tell us. The social justice left demands that we feel bad for teenagers who settle scores with knives. Wokeness orders us to coddle celebrities who lash out at private citizens, sending mobs to destroy small businesses for made-up offenses. We'll talk about how the modern left makes saints out of sinners and sinners out of the innocent, all in the name of what's erroneously called empathy. Coming up this week on Disaffected. Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum. This is the show where we look at politics and culture through a psychological lens, and particularly through the lens of abuse dynamics and the kind of abuse dynamics that come from what are called cluster B personality disorders. The thesis of this show is that what we are seeing politically and culturally right now, particularly on the left, what people call the woke left, or the social justice left, looks very much like the kinds of psychologically disturbed relational dynamics that happen in domestic abuse and child abuse. So that's the thesis of this show. And if you're new to it, if you want to get a grounding of why we talk about what we talk about on this show, take a look at the first couple of episodes. The first one is called Mommy Issues. The second one is called Don't Diagnose. The first one, Mommy Issues, is kind of an introduction to how I woke up to what was wrong with my family, and particularly my mother, in 2016. I woke up to the term cluster B personality disorders, and those are borderline, narcissistic, histrionic, and sociopathic. And I very quickly began to see that the same kinds of dynamics were going on in the social justice left and were behind things like cancel campaigns and virtue signaling. So those two episodes are kind of a good foundation. This week, the theme of this episode is really the tyranny of emotion. It looks to me like we are running our public lives and our public conversation based on people's feelings. You know, people have described humankind in several different ways. Homo sapiens. Some people have proposed Homo economicus. Other people have proposed Homo religiosus. And I'm going to propose Homo emotus. I feel, therefore I am. Or I feel, therefore I'm a person. And valid. We're going to talk about validation this week. But a couple of things in the news. I always talk about this with Kevin, my producer, the guy who's the other half of the show, does all the great graphics, does all the sound design, makes us look and sound professional. And it's kind of a balancing act between commenting on topical news stories, but part of me feels like I don't want my show to be running on everything that's happening at the top of the news cycle, because I think that our lives and our discussion are pegged often too closely to what CNN wants us to talk about, to what the New York Times wants us to talk about. But there are a couple of things I want to hit on. And obviously the big news this week in the United States has been the outcome of the trial of police officer Derek Chauvin in the killing of George Floyd, and a couple of other incidents similar to that. I want to call back a little bit to January, though, and I want to put up a picture here that I got off Twitter. And this is a tweet from a guy named Paul Joseph Watson. Yes, that's right, Prison Planet. I actually pay attention to people that you think should be canceled. And this juxtaposes the narrative about the police officer Brian Sicknick in the Capitol, who died, as that narrative was trying to be created at the time of the riot in the Capitol on January 6th and Brian Sicknick's death, and what actually happened. So I'm going to read to you. I know this is not a great image. I'm going to read it to you. So the journalist and commentator Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo, said this: "There's now a Brian Sicknick truth movement on the right, which suggests Sicknick either died of natural causes or was murdered to tarnish ex-President Trump. Today, this new conspiracy theory made its way to the National Review." Slide on over to the right, and what do we find? Headline in the Washington Post: "Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who engaged rioters, suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes," officials say. Conspiracy theory? Brian Sicknick truthers? This is how these narratives get set. The original story about Brian Sicknick, that all of the media, the mainstream media, jumped all over, was that he had been brutally murdered and had his head bashed in with a fire extinguisher. Do you remember this? I know, we all have memories that only last for 5 seconds these days. But think back and remember this. Look how violent these people are. They just wanted to kill. They bashed him with a fire extinguisher. Never happened. Never happened. He died of a stroke. Was it brought on by participating in that stressful riot? Perhaps it was. But he wasn't hit. He wasn't assaulted. He wasn't bashed over the head with a fire extinguisher. But so interested is the left media in creating a story about how anybody who objects to leftist politics, anybody who has broken away from the Democratic Party, is a conspiracy theory type person, that they just can't allow facts to be facts. And it bothers me because I have this feeling that people are going to remember the fire extinguisher story, but they're not going to remember this follow-up. They're not going to remember that the actual cause of this man's sad death was a couple of strokes. It's like when newspapers or media outlets publish a false story or run with an initial narrative and then they run a correction later. Well, the original story that turns out to be a fabrication, a misunderstanding, or an outright lie runs across the top of the page, and the correction is down on A16 in a little box on the corner and nobody remembers it. So what's our history going to reflect? Who knows? So the verdict in the George Floyd murder trial. I'm not going to say a lot about this because there's a lot that's already been said. Everybody has something to say about it. Most of it isn't worth listening to. But obviously Derek Chauvin was found guilty. But there is a question out there about how influenced the jury may have been by the theatrics around this trial, right? First off, the city reached a settlement with the Floyd family. I think the figure was $27 million. This happened before the trial concluded. And on the day leading up to the verdict, the day before and the day of, lots of Democratic officials were weighing in, talking about how they hoped the jury would reach the right verdict. In fact, President Joe Biden said that he was praying for the right verdict. You can't, I don't even know where to start with this anymore. The right verdict is the verdict that the jury comes up with, whether you agree with it or not. That is the point of the adversarial legal process, and that is the point of the presumption of innocence until you are proven guilty. And all of this pressure to find the right verdict, to serve the narrative. And the narrative is that American police are institutionally racist, that they are deliberately murderous toward black men, that this is a goal they have and it's something that they carry out with impunity. Most people think that the number of black people killed by police officers is orders of magnitude more than it actually is. So they don't just think that a few more black people get killed by police. They think that multiples and magnitudes of order more people get killed than actually are. And I am left with questions about how much this pressure and these theatrics and these histrionics influence jurors. because there's a threat of riots in American cities now over incidents like this. We see it happening over and over again. All the riots that started last year, Black Lives Matters, mostly peaceful protests that burned cities, burned government buildings, broke glass in windows of private businesses, many of them minority and black owned. This kind of pressure has an effect on people, and I am left with questions about whether outrageous, inappropriate statements from the president, from other political officials, and the constant drumbeat from the media really allowed the jury to contemplate what they saw and come to a conclusion based on the evidence that was presented to them, rather than fears about their social standing or even fears about their safety. So we'll see what happens with that. This one. From Nancy Pelosi. I quote, "Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. Because of you and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous for justice." Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. She's telling you what she's about. This kind of naked, what is the word I'm looking for? Power. It's about power. It's about the narrative of institutional racism and the intent to murder black men that is imputed to the police, that is giving the Democratic Party the story they want to have. And we hear so much of it every day that it's almost hard to be shocked anymore. But this is Speaker Pelosi. Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. Wonder how his family feels about that. And then, of course, we have more in this narrative, this constant narrative that white America hates black America. So this week, a young woman, a 16-year-old girl named Ma'Khia Bryan, was killed by police. But that's not all there is to the story, is it? She was in a fight with people in the neighborhood and another young woman, and she was swinging a knife. You can watch the video. You can hear what she says on the video. Quote, "I'm gonna stab the fuck out of you, bitch." I have no idea what was going on in this altercation. Neither do you. I don't know who started it. Neither do you. There may be an element of self-defense there. It may be a purely offensive crime. But somebody in the neighborhood called the police and said, "There's a young woman out here swinging a knife. She's trying to stab people." The police officer showed up while this conflagration was in full fire and shot this girl as she tried to, shot Ma'Khia Bryan as she tried to stab another girl. I'm sorry, I don't have her name in front of me. And he saved her from being stabbed and possibly killed. And immediately people are calling for this police officer's head. He saved another girl from being stabbed. Of course it's tragic. Of course it's tragic. What the hell are 16-year-old kids doing arguing on a suburban street in a driveway next to parked cars and a nicely manicured lawn? With knives? Of course this is tragic. But how have we come to the conclusion that this police, I mean, I'm sure he's being protected right now. And I'm sure he's scared for his life. What is it that we want people to do? Well, let's ask some activists. This is from activist Bree Newsom. You may remember Bree for becoming famous in 2015 for climbing a flagpole at the Capitol in South Carolina and tearing down a Confederate flag. That's enough, apparently, to make you an activist. She's a big BLM activist now. This is what Bree had to say. Teenagers have been having fights, including fights involving knives, for eons. We do not need police to address these situations by showing up at the scene and using a weapon against one of the teenagers. Really? What do we need? What are we to do? Let them fight it out? Victor wins? Somebody dies? Defund the police? All cops are bastards? Do you think the girl whose life was saved by that police officer thinks he's a bastard? Has anyone asked that girl who almost got killed what she thinks? Has anyone asked what her parents and her family think? Not that I've heard yet. Haven't seen any reporting on it. I have heard from Mom, though, from Ma'Khia Bryant's mother. She said Ma'Khia promoted peace. She had a motherly way about her, Mom says. Motherly. Peaceful. I'm gonna stab the fuck out of you, bitch. Something's not adding up, but maybe I'm using old math where 2 + 2 = 4 instead of 5. Where was Mom? Ma'Khia Bryant was in foster care. Where was Dad? What's going on here? This stuff, friends, these are the public consequences of dysfunctional and broken families. Single-parent households, poverty, lack of fathers, irresponsible parents, kids ending up in foster care or in juvenile hall. This starts in the home. We are seeing the results of our laissez-faire attitude, our non-judgmental attitude, our single mothers are doing the best they can attitude. This is where crime and murder and drug dealing and prostitution come from. Let's take a break and come back. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. And when you subscribe, hit that notification bell and stay with us in real time as we take a new close look every week and examine how to identify and contend with the abuse dynamics at play in the world around us. Welcome back. A lot of you sent emails this week, and some of you have left phone calls on our listener line. Thank you very much. I especially want to thank those of you who signed up to support us on Patreon. As I've said before, this show right now is a labor of love. Both Kevin and I have day jobs, so every little bit helps, and I appreciate that. And if you would like to help support the show and grow the show, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/disaffected. That's patreon.com/disaffected. DISSAFFECTED. Yes, I do hear you, listeners. I saw some of your YouTube comments. We are working on other donation platforms like Subscribestar. It is coming. I do hear you. But again, day job, full-time day jobs. So we do a lot of work on this on the weekend, but that stuff is coming because we do know that, well, it gives me a good segue to talk about Rumble. Take a look at us on Rumble, too. I love seeing you guys come in when we do the live premieres on YouTube, and I love the chat, and I love that you're participating in it. Thank you very much. But as a reminder, YouTube is very censorious. And sooner or later, if this show gets popular enough, it's likely that they are either going to demonetize us or they are going to pull the plug on the show altogether, because it's happened to people who have actually famous, widespread shows that are much bigger than this one. So don't expect that that's going to, I mean, I hope I'm wrong about this, but don't expect that that's going to be a permanent home. So take a look at us also on Rumble, rumble.com/disaffected. Thank you very much. There should be emails in your inboxes, those of you who signed up and helped support the show. I think I've gotten to all of you, and I have listened to your phone calls as well. And another thing that we will have going forward, we're going to have some more audience interaction. We're working on getting a website up for the show itself. So there's a place where I can blog, you guys can leave comments. And hopefully soon we will have some shows where we do some live interaction, maybe live chat or take phone calls. So thanks for sticking with us. We're still at the baby stage here, but we're growing. So as I was thinking about putting this show together, and I thought about, the concept of the tyranny of emotion, we really are being asked to, and in some ways almost forced to emote constantly. This culture doesn't want us to think. It doesn't want us to analyze. It doesn't want us to ask questions. It wants us to feel. It wants us to feel about things. And it wants us to emote about things. And this is entirely in keeping with, a better way to say it is, this makes the media money. This is what the mainstream media wants. They don't want analysis. They're not asking the right questions, but they don't want you to ask the right questions either. They want to program you to feel and emote. And this tweet from CNN really drives me up the wall. So we've got here a picture of Emmett Till and a picture of George Floyd. And for those of you who don't know, the Emmett Till case, a tragic and sad case in 1955, and it was an important part of the American Civil Rights Movement. Emmett Till was, I believe, a 14-year-old boy in Mississippi who allegedly wolf whistled at a white woman, and then some white men came and beat the hell out of him and killed him. And his mother, Mamie, did a very courageous thing. She insisted on an open casket funeral so that the world could see what these men and their racism had done to her son. And the pictures were published in Jet magazine. I don't know if Jet magazine still exists. It was a long time, or maybe is. It was a long time black magazine. And there's Emmett Till in his open casket with his disfigured face for everybody to see. A clear case of virulent bigotry, racism, murderous racism, an important part of the American civil rights history. And in this picture, we've got CNN putting Emmett Till up next to George Floyd. What do you think you're supposed to think, and excuse me, not think, what do you think you're supposed to feel about that? So CNN says, when Deborah Watts met Philanese Floyd, they already knew each other's pain without saying a word. The cousin of Emmett Till and the brother of George Floyd both know what it's like to have a family member die suddenly and violently. So this explicit linkage of George Floyd's death with Emmett Till's death, so that we feel, not think, feel. Are these two cases comparable? I don't think so. Emmett Till was a boy, and he was murdered by racist thugs. There's no moral ambiguity about that, none whatsoever. It was a hideous crime. There's a lot more ambiguity with George Floyd. Yes, I know. Derek Chauvin has been convicted. But the background and the context are not the same. First of all, he's not a young boy. Second, this was a police encounter that appears to have come from the fact that George Floyd was engaging in behavior possibly due to being high on drugs, like trying to pass a counterfeit bill. He also had a criminal record, George Floyd did, including pointing a gun at a pregnant woman. That doesn't mean George Floyd should have died. And I shouldn't have to say this. None of you should have to say it. It doesn't mean that he should have died. But these are not comparable cases. And putting them together like this is a way of trying to put... Well, it's the same thing they're doing with Ma'Khia Bryant. And something I'm going to talk about in the rest of this episode. These issues are not, if you'll pardon the expression, they're not as black and white as we like to pretend they are. They're not as morally black and white. People are complicated. It's much easier to feel sympathy and outrage for a young kid like Emmett Till, who got killed in the racist South in 1955. It's very easy to have sympathy for that because it is a pretty clear-cut moral case. But the case of George Floyd is not so morally clear-cut. And that doesn't mean he deserved to die. It doesn't. But he also wasn't just a 14-year-old kid who happened to say something inappropriate or whistle the wrong way and offend some white guys on a hair trigger who had hair trigger tempers. But this is what the media does. And we're not supposed to say anything about this. We're just supposed to say, we're supposed to feel their pain and emote for them. This is the halo that our modern conversation has put around classes of people that we have constructed as eternal victims. And I've talked about this before, the phenomenon of the sacred caste status. I didn't come up with that term. I don't remember who did, but it's a very good one. When you put a halo around someone and you make a particular identity group into a sacred caste, they can no longer be criticized. They can never be aggressors. They can never be wrong. They can never make mistakes. They can never deserve any consequences that come to them. Nothing is their fault at all. They are pure. They are angelic. They are morally right, and they are only ever victims. This kind of black and white thinking, if you describe it in psychological terms, is called splitting. Splitting a person into all good or all bad. Total valuation on a pedestal or total devaluation and bringing them down off the pedestal. People aren't like that. Most people aren't like that. Life isn't like that. Splitting, by the way, is one of the major expressions of borderline personality disorder. Not being able to see someone as a complex human being, but only as an evil force or an all good force. And to the extent that we can extend this metaphor of the personality disorder to a political party or to a political point of view, to a close approximation, the Democratic left in this country is acting like it has a social case of borderline personality disorder. It is all about emoting. It is about being emotionally dysregulated. It's about being histrionic. It's about ginning up your own victim status. And if you can't get enough victim status to get attention for yourself, then you find someone else who can be a victim and you show all the good you do by how heartbroken you are for this victim. Let's get a little bit more abstract. COVID. So I pulled this tweet from an organization called Vermont Help Link. It's an image, again, don't think, only feel. It's an image of a doctor in a mask, of course, because good people wear masks and bad people don't wear masks, looking sort of in a melancholy way out a window, right? The tweet says, as a healthcare worker or first responder, you know how difficult times like these can be. So talk to us and find free confidential mental health referrals today. And then there's a link to Vermont Health Link, which is apparently offers support for alcohol and drug addiction, but probably just mental health counseling as well. Yes, I know. I'm churlish. I'm criticizing people who are just trying to help. This isn't about just trying to help. This is about emotional theatricality. There has been no COVID crisis in the state of Vermont. COVID has come here because the virus is real, but there has been no crisis here for an entire year, even though almost every single citizen in the part of Vermont that I live in walks around in a mask. Today, what is today's date? April 20, I don't even remember the date. You'll know. As I was driving downtown to drop my friend off at work and then come into the studio, I'm just watching people walk around on the street. It's a beautiful day today. It's almost 70 degrees. Everybody's grass is growing. Buds are popping out on the trees. And as I said in the last episode, I'm starting to see more people walk around outside without masks, which is a good thing. But it's still so few that I notice them and remember their faces. Everybody around the University of Vermont campus is walking around out of doors with a mask on, whether they're in groups or by themselves. People walking their dogs, masked up. People alone in cars, alone in automobiles, masked up. People walking down Church Street, our downtown promenade, masked up. Again today, I was the only person, when I counted on Church Street, who was not wearing a mask out of doors. This is what COVID has looked like in Vermont. Oh, and if you want more details about this, go back to the episode, The Church of Masketarianism. It's about a month and a half old now. And amazingly, as some of you watching the show, I'm sure will have had similar experiences. When I walked away from traditional leftist and democratic politics over the past 5 years, I lost most of my friends. And it's funny, you can walk away from a political grouping, but they don't really want you to walk away, because there are people that I haven't spoken to in a couple of years because I'm now a contaminant to them. I'm one of those evil people who doesn't believe in all liberal politics anymore. They won't stop yapping. They won't stop talking about me. I'm the great Satan to some of these people. And they are particularly exercised by my episode, The Church of Masketarianism, where I talked about the creepy sci-fi dystopia atmosphere that has taken over in Vermont since COVID came along. The announcements on the PA system on a constant loop at every grocery store. Please notice the one-way marker aisles that will guide you safely through the aisles. The signs everywhere. Please wear a mask. Please wear a mask. Sanitize your hands. I mean, and people here are intensely compliant. You walk into a grocery store and you see people dutifully, well, they've got their mask on before they even get out of the car, because you got to wear it in your car by yourself, right? Got to do that. They walk in, hand sanitizer. I mean, some of these people, it's conspicuous performance. And I'll admit, I do some conspicuous performance too. When I leave a business, I mean, obviously, I have to wear a mask if I'm going to go into businesses. I understand that. I may not like it, but I have to do it. But this is not a symmetrical relationship, right? People don't want you to just do it because it's the rules. They want you to do it because you mean it. And I don't mean it. And I resent it. And it's ridiculous. And I find it a form of psychological pollution. I think this is having a measurable deleterious effect on our mental health, because I can see it in the way people interact with each other, or rather don't interact with each other. I still have the experience several times a week of walking down a sidewalk and having somebody coming at me in the opposite direction who goes out of his way to go around me because I'm not wearing a mask. Some people actually flatten themselves against walls. They're very histrionic about it, and they get a look like this. Oh, shut up. You're not afraid of me. You're not. You want to have a performance. You want a virtue signal. You want other people to notice you looking afraid so that they will point at me and say, bad. Here's what it actually has looked like in Vermont. So we're more than a year into the COVID pandemic. Guess how many deaths we've had? 244. Sorry. This is insane. We've had 244 deaths in Vermont total. Do you know how many we have in an average year? 6,000. About 6,000 people in Vermont die every year. And no, that's not 244 excess deaths. I couldn't actually get to the data to, it's actually, you can't really say in a small state like this with a population of like 660,000, there's enough numerical variation that probably falls within the margin of error. So you can't even say that we had 244 more deaths than we would have without COVID, because the vast majority of people who die from COVID are elderly people. That's a fact. Kids are not dying from this. Middle-aged people are not dying from this. Yes, a few do, sure. Pre-existing conditions, obesity, et cetera, et cetera. We know that's true, but it's a very, very small number. This is a good thing, right? This is a good thing. Why aren't we experiencing this as a good thing? Why do we like the misery? And we do. We do. Because if we didn't, people would not be getting angry at people like me. I'm not the only one. There have to be hundreds of talk show and podcast hosts right now who are saying the same things that I'm saying or very similar things. I'm certainly not the only one. The media would like you to think that we're just a small percentage of outliers, but I'm not the only one. And people are angry at the good news. You're denying it. You're a COVID denier. I'm not denying anything. You're denying that this is not the Black Death. This is not 1348 in Europe. We did not lose half to 2/3 of the population. And in our state, not only have we only had 244 deaths, but our hospitals were never overflowing. Our ICUs were never overflowing. We didn't have to build any special extra outside tent hospitals. It never happened. There has been no crisis in Vermont, but there has been the theater of a crisis with the governor's unconstitutional orders that people don't mix from one household to the other, that people are not allowed to walk out of doors with someone from another household, that people are required by the governor's order to wear a mask if they come within 6 feet of each other. So this image, this tweet, as a healthcare worker or a first responder, you know how difficult times like these can be. In these difficult times, this is sore winners. This is public health loves this stuff. Public health loves being in the limelight. They love the fact that they've been handed outsized authority, not only legal authority. I mean, remember how I talked about that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has put a ban on renter evictions? How in the hell did the CDC get the power to interfere with real estate and rental transactions between landlords and renters? Right? They love this shit. They absolutely love it. They're eating it up. And they don't want to let it go. That is why they are interested in creating the perception and the set dressing to make us believe that we have a crisis that never actually happened. Let's move on to something equally irritating but a little more funny. Oh, I feel, therefore I am. Homo erotus. Demi Lovato. I think that's the first time I've ever said her name out loud because I guess she's a singer, but I'm a old person now, so I don't actually know who most of these celebrities are. And it's kind of hard to find out what they're famous for because it used to be that only Paris Hilton was famous for being famous, but a lot of people are famous for being famous now. It's very strange. Sort of like when you think about somebody says, what does the world rest on? Well, it's turtles all the way down. I don't even know what it is all the way down with these celebrities. I don't even know what fame means anymore. So Demi Lovato. And take a look at this picture. Some of you out there have said, another little digression here. Tell me what's on your mental list of tells that you use to assess whether somebody that you're coming into contact with is likely to be a troublesome, quarrelsome personality. And I thought about it, and my initial answer is no. Because the point of this show and why I talk about the theatrics, the psychological state of mind that propels people to create crises where no crises actually exist, the narcissism and the self-regard. What I hope to do on this show is help you make use of tools that you already have, help you make use of knowledge that you already have, but that you haven't figured out yet how it hangs together. So initially, I want to say, no, I'm not going to give you that list because I want you to do the work. I don't want to hand you a checklist, and I do not want to handhold you. I'm not trying to be anyone's therapist, and I'm also not trying to say I'm an expert who can give you a checklist or an algorithm that if you just follow all of Josh's steps the right way, you'll be fine. It doesn't work that way. I'm not I don't cook people fish dinners. I teach them how to fish. So I want you to make your own list. You should start noticing the things about people that correlate with how they end up treating you once you get to know them. Make your own list. But I'm going to give you one here. Demi Lovato. Watch out for people who wear their mouth upside down. Okay? Because they're usually not nice people. And I'm only actually 20% joking. You can tell a lot by how someone holds their face and presents themselves. Like last week when I showed you that picture of Joy Reid where she was feeling cute, double masking, feeling cute, and staring into the camera that way, that hungry stare. That's an example of a tell. When somebody chooses a photograph of themselves or takes a picture of themselves, sort of staring at you in a challenging way. You know how an easy way to visualize this? I was going to say sorry for the digression, but I can't apologize. This show is half the time 40% digressions. Take two people, Marilyn Monroe and Madonna, okay? Now, Marilyn Monroe and Madonna, in their own ways, have been sex symbols. But they're very different kinds of people. Yeah, in case you're wondering, yeah, I think Madonna's behavior is consistent with cluster B mentation. Mm-hmm. But also, there's a pretty strong opinion, and I think it's probably true. It's likely that Marilyn Monroe had borderline personality disorder herself. If she did, she was definitely more of the waif type, the helpless little girl, less of the sort of malicious, malignant, ball-busting, narcissistic kind. So take these two women. Imagine them in your head, the way they looked at the camera, the sort of aura they gave off. And we know that Madonna has spent a lot of her career aping the look and the manner of Marilyn Monroe. And she gets some of it really well, but there's a very different quality between these two women. When you look at Marilyn Monroe in a photograph, even when she's looking right at the camera, it's as if she's inviting you to look with her. It's soft. Madonna is hard as nails. When she looks at the camera, she's challenging you. That look in her eyes, that direct stare, even when she's actually copying a famous Marilyn Monroe photograph, the psychological atmosphere is entirely different. She looks at you like, I'm going to eat you alive. Marilyn Monroe did not have that quality to her character film. So that's a tell. And wearing your mouth upside down is often a tell of at least a very unpleasant person. So let's get back to Demi Lovato and her frozen yogurt tirade. So here's what happened. As Newsbusters said, Piers Morgan, the British daytime talk host, called out singer Demi Lovato for sending millions of her followers to harass a family-owned frozen yogurt shop because she found the idea of, quote, sugar-free products triggering. Well, of course she did. Something had to be triggering, didn't it? So this is what Demi Lovato said. I don't know if it was on Twitter or Instagram. Here I go again. Oh, also, you know, I talk about borderline glasses, those chunky glasses. I realize that some of you are probably poking fun at me because these reading glasses are almost borderline glasses themselves. They're just reading glasses, though. The only reason I pick them up is because they're literally $1 at the dollar store, and I don't wear them all the time. I just wear them when I'm reading. But you can score a point against me if you think I have borderline glasses. I fess up. So she says, finding it extremely hard to order froyo from the Big Chill official when you have to walk past tons of sugar-free cookies and other diet foods before you get to the counter. She's finding it extremely hard. Look at her struggle. Look at her struggle. She said her experience at the frozen yogurt shop was, quote, terrible. and that, quote, the whole experience was triggering and awful. You can carry things for other people while also caring for another percentage of your customers who struggle daily just to even step foot in your store. Sorry about that. The daily was in all caps here. Look at her struggle. Every single day, she has to gird her loins and put on her battle armor just to get in the door of a frozen yogurt shop. Has anything that bad ever happened to you? Can you believe this stuff? Why is she upset about all of this? Because she says that she's suffering from an eating disorder and she's trying to get past that. And she says that eating disorders, anorexia, is one of the deadliest mental illnesses, only second to opioid overdoses. And this is her message to the frozen yogurt shop. Don't make excuses. Just do better. Do better. We are living in a world where we expect this kind of thing from celebrities, and where, I mean, as you're watching this, I'm sure that, like me, you find this as ridiculous and histrionic as I do. But these people have millions of fans who don't see this as ridiculous and histrionic. They see it as a righteous battle cry. And they harass these businesses. What happened in our culture, and when did it happen? When did celebrities start targeting private citizens on social media and private small businesses, trying to economically ruin them? This is, I don't even know what the word is for it. I mean, if you want to talk about punching down, and that's a favorite thing of the social justice crowd, you know, you're not supposed to make jokes at the expense of someone who's poorer than you or has more oppressions than you, because that's punching down. You're only supposed to punch up at people who have more power. Celebrities are punching down constantly. These people have millions of dollars. They have millions of fans. They are on television. They get people quoting them at the drop of a hat. They have an enormous amount of cultural power, and they use that cultural power to call out basically an ice cream shop owned by a family and tell them not to make excuses and do better. She's triggered by their diet foods because it reminds her that some people feel guilty and want sugar-free foods. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And we're supposed to all feel this with her and feel her pain. Bitch, please. This is classic behavior. This behavior is consistent with classic borderline personality disorder. And when we get to the end segment of this show, I'm going to talk a little bit about actually having genuine empathy for these people. And I don't mean sympathy. So don't think I'm going to tell you that we should be feeling bad for Demi here. Empathy is not the same as sympathy. But this is consistent with borderline personality disorder. Anorexia itself is a very frequent symptom of borderline personality disorder, particularly in women. But I note that gay men also have a higher incidence of eating disorders as compared to heterosexual men. It's not that they don't occur in straight men, but this is a particular symptom that often coincides with borderline personality disorder in women and young women. And I don't know what the statistics are here. It may be that anorexia is one of the deadliest mental illnesses, but I'm wondering if that shades into the fact that it's often a component or a symptom of borderline personality disorder, because most of the literature describes borderline personality disorder as the or one of the most deadly mental illnesses, because I think the statistic is about 1 in 10 borderline cases actually successfully commit suicide. And there's so much overlap between anorexia and BPD, it's hard to tease this out. This is even more ridiculous. Let's move on to Sam Smith. Sam Smith, singer, if you can call him that. I think his music is shit. His behavior is also consistent with borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. Again, folks, I'm not diagnosing anybody because I can't. I'm not a doctor. Even if I point and say, I know that's borderline personality disorder, I can't actually make a formal diagnosis of anybody. So if you're getting a little bit head up about that, first of all, step one, please go back and listen to the episode Don't Diagnose, because I talk in that episode about how don't diagnose is actually a way of covering up problem people and shutting up critics who are pointing to a very real psychological disturbance that has consequences not just for that person, but for the rest of us. So I have a lot of issue with don't diagnose, and I talk about it in that show. But also, I don't know these people. I can't actually diagnose them. But what I can tell you is I know borderline type behavior when I see it. I know cluster B behavior when I see it, and this is consistent with that. So Sam Smith over the past few years has been, well, as they say, in his feels. He has wanted to be a mother. He sits down for interviews with the British press and talks about how he wants to have children, but he wants to be recognized as their mother. Okay. Then he's non-binary. What is non-binary? Who knows? Well, I don't feel like a man and I don't feel like a woman. Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't. Non-binary. Non-binary is basically, I get, it's a substitute for personality. It's a person who's not any different, special, or cuter than the rest of us, and who thinks that he or she is the first person to break sex role stereotypes and be, quote, gender non-conforming. So that's non-binary. Sam Smith also stages emotional breakdowns for the cameras. About 5-6 months ago, there was this spread in one of the British newspapers about how he's having a really hard time mentally in lockdown in this mansion that he lives in. And there's pictures of him sitting on the steps of his mansion crying like this. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And now what has he done? You see, for people like this, for people who are seeking attention, they're trying to fill a hole inside of themselves because they don't have a whole personality, right? There are broken, missing parts of them. And if they got the right therapy, and if anybody who loved them was able to really have a heart-to-heart with them and find some way to connect and say, I know you're suffering, but only you can stop your suffering. And the first step to that is being honest about the fact that you are creating a lot of your own suffering and you don't need to. They might get better, but these people have no chance, right? They're in Hollywood. Hollywood is a place of broken people from broken homes, broken childhoods, who are validated in their brokenness, whose brokenness is packaged and monetized, whose personas are created out of their broken pieces and sold to us. There's no hope of getting better in Hollywood. So what does he have now? Now that his other theatrics aren't bringing him the attention he wants, he's got a new tattoo. Look at this. He has tattooed his image of himself as a little boy on his arm. And for those of you listening, it looks like a pencil line drawing. It's a full-length mirror, a dressing mirror with a little boy standing in front of the mirror in white briefs and high heels. This is a Freudian smorgasbord. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's also very sad. It's very, very sad. Like, oh, I swear. I feel so conflicted about people like this. Mostly they annoy the shit out of me because there are so many of them and they are so forced down our throats. But I also recognize and have suspicions about where this kind of broken personality comes from. Sam Smith is a gay guy, okay? He's just a gay guy. He's not non-binary. He's not trans. He's not going to be a mother. He's just a gay guy. And if his tattoo is any indication of how he is conceived of himself, how his view of himself as a person, as a man, as a sexual being is any indication, I'm betting that Sam Smith had some experiences that were similar to what most boys experience when they turn out to be gay later in life. It certainly rings bells for me, right? I've told you in past episodes about how, like many gay men, when I was a boy, I spent a long time thinking I was supposed to be a girl. I liked dressing up in girls' clothes. I liked makeup. I liked traditionally feminine activities and fantasies. I didn't get along with other boys. I was picked on. I wasn't coordinated. I wasn't athletic. I was a sissy boy, right? Lots of gay men are sissy boys when they're boys. And because we don't know what to do in this culture with sissy boys are left on their own to try to figure it out. And that kind of pressure from society, from your peers, and honestly from your parents. Again, nobody likes to hear this. They don't like to hear people say it. But gay people, gay men and lesbians, huge numbers of us come from abusive homes, right? Not just like 10%, 20%. It's much more than that. And a lot of us experienced being policed, corrected, chastised, called perverted or dirty by parents who couldn't accept that we did not do gender the way we were supposed to be. So, you know, you can think of this tattoo as sort of a window into his psyche. And it's sad. It's sad because I think I know where it comes from, but I don't think like somebody like Sam, as long as he stays a celebrity, as long as he stays in Hollywood, I don't think he has any chance of getting better. Meanwhile, it's very annoying. One more in this vein, and then we'll take a break. Last week, I talked about infantilization. I talked about the childlike imagery that is used by companies, by actors and actresses, by social justice activists, by journalists, to cover up bad adult behavior, right? I talked about the fact that we are treating 30 and 35-year-olds as if they were actual adolescents, you know? I've begun to notice that in conversation, we're describing people who have been adults for 12 years, 15 years, even 20 years as young people. 30, 35, pretty soon it's going to be pushed to 40. And people in that age group, a generation below me, or almost a generation below me, clearly grew up in a very different world than I did because they seem to think of themselves as children. They think that this behavior is cute. They think that they're entitled to have little timeouts from conversations because, you know, they need to go to their snuggle space and their safe space. It's very creepy. And the infantilization and the use of childlike imagery for adult concerns just keeps getting worse. So look at this week. There's a rag in the UK called Pink News, which advertises itself as an LGBT publication. I mean, I can't really go at them for that because I don't believe LGBT is real. There is no such thing as the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans community. Yes, I know. Everyone says there is. But we lesbians and gays and bisexuals don't have any demographic connection to people who call themselves trans. We don't believe we're the opposite sex. We don't believe we were born in the wrong body. We never told people that in order to treat us fairly, that they needed to say that we were straight. I mean, it's just bizarre. Trans is not LGB. So there's a picture of a box of Kellogg's cereal. The box itself is deep purple, and purple is a color that's often associated with lesbian and gay stuff. And there's a bowl of cereal, because it's a box of cereal, on the front with all of the traditional Kellogg's cartoon mascots around it. Tony the Tiger, Toucan Sam, I think the Dig-It Frog is on there. Snap, Crackle, and Pop, the little elves from Rice Krispies. And they're all around this rainbow multicolored fruit-flavored bowl of cereal. And the box says, "Together with Pride." And the caption is, Kellogg's is launching LGBT-themed cereal so you can start your day with maximum gay. So many of us, my age and older, who have been involved in actual gay rights activism, asking for reasonable things like the right to not be thrown out of our apartments because we're gay, the right not to be fired from our jobs because we're gay, the right to access the same kinds of contractual relationships and next of kin status that marriage traditionally gave to straight people. Now we have gay marriage. Whether or not you agree with the term gay marriage or whether you like how that ended up, the claim was reasonable. The claim was we should be entitled to equal status under the law, not special status. We don't want more rights than other people. This is another thing that distinguishes gay and lesbian civil rights struggles from trans struggles. We were asking for equality. These people are asking to violate other people's boundaries, particularly the effort to declare that trans women are women and therefore they must be allowed into women's domestic violence shelters. If they're 16 years old and male, but they identify as a girl, they must be called trans girls and they must be allowed to be on the girls' track team, even though that means because they're a man and they have the biological advantage of a man that they're going to beat the actual girls every time. We gay people did not do that. So even if you're watching here, even if you're one of those people who has questions or reservations about things like gay marriage, recognize that what we were asking for is nothing like what this set is asking for today. But those of us who participated in those civil rights efforts had to go to such lengths to tell people, we are not trying to indoctrinate your children. We're not trying to snatch them. We're not trying to cozy up to kids so that we can molest them. We're not trying to turn your kids gay, as if we could do that. And it feels like all of that effort is for nothing. Because look at this. Start your day with maximum gay. This is a kid's cereal. No, I am going to say it. This is absolutely the worst thing that you should be feeding your kids for breakfast anyway. It's nothing but sugar and carbohydrates. This is actual poison, right? This is, you wonder why kids have behavior problems? Well, get them started on a bowl of vitamin fortified sugar, and those kids are going to have a blood sugar crash by 10 a.m. and they're going to be angry and antsy. So the stuff is poison to begin with. But lesbian and gay, trans, and bisexual concerns are not children's concerns. Why do we need to have us on these boxes? What is this? You can't blame people looking at this now and saying, maybe they were after our kids all along. You can't blame them. Why wouldn't they think that? I'm starting to think that. Start your day with maximum gay. What the hell is wrong with people? Fellow gays and lesbians, you have got to speak up about this. You've got to speak up. Find a place to do it, but push back against this because we are all going to pay the price. This is grooming. This is cultural grooming. Okay? I'm not saying that it's wrong for children to be aware that there are gay people. I don't think there should be such a stigma about homosexual relationships that we can't mention that in front of children. We have to make it a taboo thing. I don't think that's healthy either. But this is grooming. And children should not be used to sell cereal for adult. I don't even know how to express this. It's wrong. And it makes the lesbian, gay, and bisexual equality effort look like a predatory movement. And I'm afraid I do believe that today it is becoming an actual predatory movement. This is why I have disassociated myself with anything called LGBT or LGBTQ, queer, which is just a name for anyone who wants to violate sexual boundaries or put their sexual kinks out in public, walking around on dog leashes or in cartoon animal costumes and calling themselves furries. It's just parading your perversion in public. I don't want anything to do with that. That had nothing to do with the kinds of things that we activists were asking for when gay people didn't actually have equal rights. Speak up about this. See you after the break. Hey listeners, guess what? We're on Patreon now. Bringing you this show costs money. Would you chip in to help? Go to patreon.com/disaffected. That's patreon.com/DISAFFECTED. Thank you. Welcome back. I want to take this last segment of the show and be a little bit more serious about this, because I've been doing some thinking about what empathy really means versus how we talk about it in this culture, this narcissistic, emotional culture that asks us to feel about everything primarily. Excuse me. And there's somebody, if you're interested in this, in the kinds of topics that I talk about, if you're interested in a therapist perspective, there's somebody that I recommend that you follow on Twitter. I hope I am pronouncing your name right. I do apologize if I'm not, and I will correct myself if I need to. Sirut K. Chawla is a British therapist who I follow on Twitter. She's not woke, and she's very concerned about how wokeness has taken over the culture, but particularly how wokeness has taken over mental health therapy, both culturally and in what is being taught in the schools. And she talks a lot about how modern therapists seem to believe that their responsibility to their clients is to validate them. So I want to show you a tweet. This is a very good thread. Got me thinking about this. And she says in this tweet, this is the first in thread, on validation. People who only validate, coddle, soothe, and tell you how bad you have it aren't helping you. She's right. And this is what we seem to want as a culture. We want to be constantly validated. Think about the conversations you see among the young woke, particularly those who are into the gender wars, the non-binary stuff, the trans stuff. They constantly say, non-binary identities are valid. Trans people are valid. My womanhood is valid. And again, remember, to the extent that any of the people we're talking about are actually suffering from something like borderline personality disorder, and many of them are, it's quite obvious. Remember that one of the characteristics of the cluster B personality disorders is arrested emotional development. It is exactly what it says it is. When you see narcissistic people, emotionally unstable people, and you say to yourself, they're acting just like a toddler, you've actually found, you're seeing something real. Their emotional maturity level did in fact stop at the toddler stage. They're acting like toddlers because emotionally they are toddlers. And I'm not saying that in a critical way, and I'm not trying to be cute or make a joke. They are literally emotional toddlers. Some of them are emotional teens. Sometimes they fluctuate. They did not get the kind of upbringing or the kind of environment that helped shape their personality and character into a normal and well-rounded emotional adult. And there has been a huge increase in the incidence of symptoms associated with narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder in many studies that have tracked this in young people over the past 20 years. Young people today are acting younger than they did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They do appear to have age regressed. If you've noticed it, you're noticing something real. And as these people grow up and they become counselors, they become therapists, they become professionals, they become judges, they become lawyers, they are bringing this emotional immaturity into the professions and the fields that they work in. So we have got adults now who are reinforcing this. They don't even realize how emotionally compromised they are. They think this is normal. A therapist's job is not primarily to validate you. If you think that your therapist is there to let you cry on her shoulder and tell you you're wonderful just the way you are, you're not getting therapy. You're not. No, your therapist's job is not to tell you, you're not wonderful just as you are, you suck. You're terrible. Of course not. Their job is to help you see the ways in which the way you think, the feelings that you experience, and the way you link up your emotions with your thoughts contributes to problems that lead you to depression, to anxiety, to the kind of trepidation that keeps you stuck in a job that you don't want and you won't take the next step in your career. They're not there to tell you you're just wonderful the way you are. They're not there to tell you you're terrible the way you are, but they're there to help you see the reality and to help you understand that your thinking patterns and your patterns of emoting may need to be changed to bring you self-actualization, real self-actualization. Not the pop culture kind, the real kind. Notice how we talk almost exclusively in a language of emotions. Notice how over the past 20 years, people don't speak the same way. They don't use the same words. And it's not just the natural progression of language. Language changes. I mean, vernacular in the 1940s and 1950s is readily identifiable to us when we watch old newsreel footage because we don't speak that way anymore. That's normal and it will always happen in every human society. This is something different. This is a turn toward the histrionic and the emotional at the expense of thought. Thought is not feeling and feeling is not thought. Your feelings, your emotions are not you thinking. They are you feeling. Notice how we say, I feel that this is wrong. Or, I feel that we should da 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 da. It sounds small, but it isn't small. It's a tell. People don't say, I think, or it's my view. They say, I feel. If you are looking to be validated constantly, you're never going to be happy. Because not everybody is going to like you, first of all, no matter how charming you are. And people are not going to simply tolerate all of your foibles and your emotional breakdowns and your sensitivities just because they're yours. But this is an expectation that we are being taught that we should have of other people. And it is, I've kind of talked around this in episodes before, but I think I'm going to have to get right to it. Something has happened to our discourse that something has feminized our discourse. What do I mean by that? I'm not saying that, oh, this is how women are always like this, and this is how men are always like this. Yes, there are differences between men and women. I'm not going to get into it in this episode, whether those differences are inborn, whether they're acculturation. I'm sure it's a mixture of both. I don't really care. That's not the point. The point is what's going on. Our public discourse has become feminized in a particular way. We speak as if we were kindly school teachers, kindergarten teachers, preschool teachers. We are upbraided, chastised, thrown out of social groups for being unfeeling and uncaring. People demand that we empathize, and what they really mean is sympathize and coo at. They don't actually mean empathy, they mean sympathetic cooing. You can't win in this game because it's not about emotional maturity. We can't keep continuing like this. And I see this happen. I mean, I see men and women do it, but I see far more women doing it. And even women who I don't think mean to do it, and women who are objecting to the overreach of trans nonsense that's threatening female-only spaces, they still engage in it. Let me give you an example. I'm going to be paraphrasing here. I'm not directly quoting somebody, but you'll have to trust me that it's an accurate paraphrase. I saw a Twitter exchange between two women that was very emblematic of many such exchanges I've seen. One woman was describing how she had a disagreement with a friend over a trans issue. I think her friend was in the trans women are women camp. And this woman I'm speaking about here said, no, men are men, women are women. You can't simply say that you are someone and expect the rest of us to believe it. And she said, I explained to my friend that she was entitled to her truth, but that she couldn't make me accept it as my truth. No. Stop with my truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's no such thing as your truth. That's not real. You find that bracing? It's because you don't hear it enough. People won't say it. It's rude, isn't it? You don't have any truth. There's no such thing as your truth. You don't. That's not what truth means. Truth refers to objective, observable events that all reasonable people observing the situation could agree on. Truth isn't everything. We are humans who have to deal with truth claims. We have to assess the truth of whether or not we have to assess the truth of advertising. We have to assess the truth of claims that are made about the automobile safety of a car that we're going to buy, right? We have to deal in truth claims, but we also have emotional lives. And our feelings, our emotions, we do experience them. Subjective experience is real in that sense, right? Insofar as these are emotions that we have inside of ourselves, but they are not truth. And when you give in to this, I was going to say language game, but it's more than a language game. It's almost an epistemology of emotion, I guess. There's no way out of it. It's a trap. Because if I have my truth and you have your truth, who wins? Who wins? You can't draw a boundary and say, this is my truth, this is your truth, because we both have to live in this world together. So I would suggest that notice these things. Obviously, I'm not perfect. I make some of the things I criticize on this show, I make these mistakes myself. I'm not above this. But if you find yourself saying my truth, notice it and stop yourself. Because it creates an economy of brand name emotions, right? So my truth is more important than your truth. My brand is more important than your brand. it's like we've pushed off the table the fact that there's actual real things that happen in the world and there are claims about the world that are false. And we've just all labeled them like there's no such thing as true or false. It's just how I feel about it. This is especially a problem for women. Women are far too accommodating with this stuff. Women generally tend to value relationships, keeping relationships, keeping community ties together, building and maintaining relationships. They are less likely, in general, to burn bridges. They're more likely to say there's something here worth preserving. But this has gotten out of control in our culture. This is what I mean when I say that we're living in a feminized conversation about this. Because women are very sensitive to accusations that they are cold or unfeeling. They're afraid of being called a bitch. They're terrified of being called a bitch. That's what it comes down to. You're a bitch if you don't emote. You're a bitch if you don't mommy people. You're a bitch if you don't budge over and make room. And when you comport yourself this way in the world, you become a doormat. So on the mild end of this, if this is your way of relating to the world, you will often find yourself being taken advantage of. You'll be the person who everybody in the office depends on to organize all the employee meetings. Nobody will lift a finger for it. You'll be the person who feels that she has to mend fences between two people who are having conflict. You will find that to the degree that you willingly take on this imposed burden, right? Some people call it emotional labor. I have some problems with that term, but there is a sense in which it's true. To the extent that you take on this imposed emotional labor, you will become a doormat. That's on the mild end. But that mindset can lead to problems that are far worse than mild. When it goes too far, you become a target of abuse. This is the kind of person who finds herself in abusive relationships with a husband who controls her every movement, who hits her when she talks back, who controls her money. We know this. We see this in domestic abuse patterns. So it's not healthy for us to fail to distinguish between emotion and thought. And it's not healthy for us to be running on an economy of emotions where everybody's particular brand of emotions is competing for supremacy with other people's. And this brings me to the last thing I want to talk about. Empathy, and what empathy really is, and what ought our relationship to empathy be? What should we think about it? How should we practice it? Whom should we practice it with? When I woke up to cluster B, when I figured my mother out back in 2016, that's when it started. And when I began to talk about what our childhood was like, a lot of people said, well, you know what this is. You may have experienced this. One of the first things people like to say to somebody who is coming out of an abusive relationship, whether it's friendship or a romantic relationship or a parent-child relationship, there's an identifiable group of people whose first instinct is to tell you that you should feel sorry for your abuser, right? So people will say, oh, your mother was a very sick woman, right? She needs help. This is a tell too. Notice when people see bad behavior, abusive behavior, or somebody melting down in public and projecting all of their inner demons onto someone else and causing strife for them, what's the first thing they say? They say, oh, she needs help. They're talking about the aggressor, not the victim. Our first inclination is to say the aggressor needs help. How many times do you ever hear people say his victim needs help? I almost never notice that. I don't think it's just a linguistic shortcut. I think it is telling on our subconscious thoughts. I think we have been trained to start putting up defenses immediately Don't see abuse. Don't call it abuse. Just be sympathetic. Just assume that the person doing the abusive behavior has a very good reason and must have been a very, very hurt person. So our attention is directed away from the fact that somebody was just abused and somebody needs to be picked up off the ground, or someone needs to be given shelter and a safe place to sleep so they don't fear being killed, or somebody needs other people to stand up for their reputation that's in tatters and say, this gossip campaign isn't true. That's where our minds should go first, but that's not where our minds go first. So I got a lot of that when I first started talking about this. But then when I was talking with my therapist, I was very resistant to this when he first brought it up, because I didn't understand what he was saying. I do understand now. He said one of the important steps, one of the things that you will find that you need to do if you are really going to integrate your childhood experience, to understand it and make sustained progress of moving past it and having a better life, is finding empathy for your mother. Now, I reacted very badly to that when I heard it first, because what I was hearing, I wasn't hearing empathy, I was hearing sympathy. And like many people who have had abusive relationships, most of us have had people lecturing us about how we need to feel bad about our abuser. We sit there almost slack-jawed. We can tell a story about, being beaten or being lied about by our parents, being locked up, some of us institutionalized. And the very first thing that some people say to us is, you should feel bad for her. What a sick person she is. That makes me rage, honestly. When that's the first reaction, that really angers me. But that's not what my therapist was saying. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad, feeling pity. Empathy is understanding, really understanding. And I said to him, I can't have empathy for my mother, because I was thinking of sympathy. But it's coming. It's come slowly over time. I understand more than I used to what forces made my mother the person that she became. And I understand more the forces that make some of these people I've been talking about into the people that they became. Demi Lovato, Sam Smith, the trans warriors. If empathy is understanding, then understanding means accepting the complicated nature of people, that they are not all good and they are not all bad. That does not mean that congenitally abusive people, like my mother, my stepfather, like so many abusive spouses, no, the moral ledger, we're not on the same plane. The husband who beat you and victimized you, you're not balanced in the scales of justice, right? You actually are the victim. You were done wrong. He's wrong. My mother was wrong to do this to children. But it came from the same kinds of abuse done to her. And, good place to plug this. I've talked about the show Unsafe Space. It's a podcast hosted by Carrie Smith and Carter Laren, and I learned so much from it. They're sort of anti-woke in the culture wars, but they have fascinating conversations about religion, spirituality, economics, political systems. I just really, really enjoy the show, and I highly recommend it. But I do recommend, if you are interested in a little bit more about this particular topic, I was on their show this past week on an episode called Deprogrammed, and I talked to Carrie for about an hour and a half about this. I got into some of this. I can understand the kinds of backgrounds that form people like this and that contribute to their emotional immaturity. And what I said to Carrie, I'll repeat here. When Somebody like Sam Smith stages one of these breakdowns and goes into a crying fit over something that most of the rest of us would not recognize as a real hurt or trauma. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's histrionic. It's over the top. It's misplaced. It's inappropriate for the situation. And Demi Lovato, she was not actually victimized by the frozen yogurt shop. Okay? That's just nonsense. But she's probably experiencing that. That's her truth, if you will. Right? People like this, cluster Bs, right? Not all of them. There's some evidence that there's some percentage, and I don't know how much it is. Some people seem to be just wired this way from birth and turn out that way, even if there's no apparent abuse in their childhood homes. That seems to be real. But most of the time there is abuse. Most of the time this is intergenerational trauma. While these people cannot rightly claim that the frozen yogurt shop or being locked up in their mansion is truly an oppression, they are still experiencing pain. It's misplaced pain, it's projected pain, it's misinterpreted pain. But what they're doing is they are rehearsing inside their own heads, and they may not even be conscious of this. They are rehearsing over and over again the ways that they were mistreated in their youth by their parents, at their boarding school, wherever they were. Something happened. A lot of something's happened, probably for a long time, that frightened them, that made them feel, invalidated. I mean, we talk about how ridiculous it is to ask everybody else to validate you, but it's not ridiculous for a child to need validation, right? We see it as ridiculous in adults because we're supposed to get to the point where we're self-confident enough that we can usually validate ourselves. These people never got this as a child. I didn't get this as a child. In some ways I did. Luckily there were adults who were bright spots in my childhood who took an interest in me and gave me things that I should have gotten at home, but they made up for some of the neglect and abuse at home. But children do need these things. They don't come out of the womb being able to self-validate. And so these people with their histrionics, and they cause a lot of trouble for other people. But to understand them is to understand that it comes from someplace real. Something happened to them that stopped their emotional maturation. So what I would say about empathy is real empathy is not sympathy, and it's not a snuggle package. Right? It's not a warm fuzzy. It's not a hug. It's understanding. And understanding means understanding that people can be both victims and perpetrators. Sometimes at the same time, sometimes at different points of their lives. I do actually feel sympathy to some degree for the Sam Smiths, the Demi Lovatos, the other broken people in Hollywood, because there's very little chance that they are ever going to get better. How are they going to get better when their brokenness is the product? When everybody around them is a yes man? Look what happened to Michael Jackson. Whatever he did or didn't do to other people, he was severely abused as a child. You could see it's written all over him. You can see it written all over Madonna. She lost her mother to cancer at age 5. I don't know the details of the story of her upbringing, but from watching her over 30, 35 years, I strongly suspect that there was other abuse going on in that household, and it's written all over her work. These are people whose emotional maturation stopped. And then they went into Hollywood. And the talents that they had, real genuine talents, were there, but nobody will say no to them. Nobody will check them. Nobody will gainsay them. Nobody can sit down and say, yeah, but you really need to attend to this. So, in a sense, these people may bedevil us. They may do some bad things. They may cause trouble, but they're rehearsing real wounds and real pain that happened to them. And the tragedy is that they're very unlikely to ever get out of it because that's the product that they sell. I've said before, fascism begins in the home, but health instability can begin in the home too. It doesn't have to be this way. If you are a parent, love your kids. Give them discipline. Discipline is not abuse. Give them stability. Validate their feelings, but help them understand the appropriate places to express them and when it isn't appropriate. Let them make mistakes. Make them pay reasonable consequences when they do bad things to other people, but give them stability. You don't have to create fascism in your home. You can create health. I'll see you next time. Hey listeners, guess what? We're on Patreon now. Bringing you this show costs money. Would you chip in to help? Go to patreon.com/disaffected. That's patreon.com/DISAFFECTED. Thank you. Want to talk back to us? You're in luck. Call our listener line and leave us a message. 202-979-2480. That's 202-979-2480. And remember, we do reserve the right to play messages on the air.